Welcome to Kairos Conversations. Hey, check this out. Guess what? All of these are different ways we in English try to get attention whenever we're telling a story, and we're going to see what that's like in Greek today. So stay tuned and let's check it out. Welcome back to Kairos Conversation. I'm your resident Hebrew enthusiast, Courtney Trotter, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Ryan Martin, the New Testament Greek guy. If you're one of those people who loves to study the Bible in the original languages, check out different Greek and Hebrew resources, or you just want to know more about the ancient culture behind the Bible, you have found the right place because we love to discover the Bible through the original languages. All right, so Ryan, I already introduced that today we're going to be looking at these different ways that we try to capture attention when telling a story. This is the fancy term for this is called discourse analysis or discourse features. So just briefly give us that introduction to what are discourse features?
Yeah, language is so fascinating, isn't it? I mean, a lot of times we're thinking about what is the content of what is being said? Let's zero in on each word and each phrase and just think what is the meaning? It's like the certainly the meaning of what's being said would be the sum of the meaning of each of these words, and it's just putting the ideas together. And it's just a lot more complicated than that. I could tell you that I'm drinking coffee and that communicates something, right? But there's a whole bunch of different ways I could communicate that same information. I could say, it's me that's drinking coffee, as not somebody else. Or what am I drinking? I'm drinking coffee. Or I could say, hey, guess what? I'm drinking coffee. You'll never guess what I'm drinking. It's coffee. There's so many different ways I can highlight different aspects of this by using what we call, discourse features or discourse devices, right? The idea of discourse analysis is how is this being said, and where does that focus our attention? And this is not just Greek that we're talking about today. This is languages in general. But of course, since God decided that he would inspire a book for us, that this is how he would communicate to his revelation to his people, we're dealing with language and these things matter.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Like you said, this is how we naturally tell stories. Any great storyteller is going to have different ways that they build suspense or highlight information here or there. And we just need to learn how Greek wants to do that. And I think one thing that I really like about this episode today is that we're going to show you some ways that you can see this in English. You don't need to know Greek to know this, but you might need to know that, hey, this is what the English is conveying here. So yeah, let's look at Mark chapter 14. And this is that story where Jesus is telling Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times.
All right, yes, this is in Mark 14. Jesus talking to Peter, right? Jesus says to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even though they all fall away, I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And more specifically today, we got this to set the context. We really want to look at that last verse there. We want to look at verse 30, which I have for you here in Greek and in English, right? And Jesus said to him, "Truly, I tell you this very night." And even in that the first line that you see there, and Jesus said to him, "Truly, I tell you," there's 3 kind of discourse features, 3 storytelling devices that help us to slow down and focus on what's coming next. That, if we're just casually reading in English, we might totally miss. So that's what we want to do today. We want to look at those 3 things.
Yeah, so that's really great to know. And like I said, most of these you're going to be able to see in your English Bibles once we just kind of give you that little clue. But the first one is not going to be the one you can see in your English Bible unless you know some Greek. So it's called the historical present. So Ryan, introduce us to that first one that's in that verse.
Yeah, the historical present. I mean, to just put a simple definition on it, this is when you're using the present tense when you're talking in the past. And we actually do this in English. When I'm telling you a story and I really want to make it seem like you were there, I could say, okay, so this guy walks in and he sits down at the bar and he starts talking to the bartender. What am I doing? Like I'm using present tense verbs to talk about something that happened in the past, right? And you see how that kind of like heightens your attention, like what's about to go down, something bad, right? And it's because I'm using these like, so this guy walks in. I could have said, so the guy walked down and he sat down at the bar. Like that's less marked, that's less interesting, but I'm using these present tense verbs. I mean, you have a picture, I don't know, I picture somebody with a good Boston accent saying like, "So I says to the guy," that's a present tense verb that's conveying something that happened in the past. In English, kind of for emphasis, and for Greek, that's part of it. But yeah, historical presence is when we're expecting a past tense verb because we're telling a story, but we see a present tense verb instead.
Yeah, so that historical present, like when we're using it in English, like just the way you were telling that story, it's like I'm supposed to imagine myself as if this situation is still unfolding. Like I'm imagining myself in the room and seeing this happen right now live, even though it's past tense, right? So I'm telling the story as
Yeah.
if it's currently happening. That's what that historical present's doing. So you kind of need to be able to tell present tense verbs in Greek and that it's not a past tense
Yeah,
verb where
this
you
is
would
something you
expect it
got to
to.
see in Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, like, before we hopped on, that there's a couple of places where you could expect to see some historical presence in the Gospels. So, what are those couple places that we could see
Yeah,
some of them?
especially in Mark. You see these historical presence a lot at the beginning of sections because they're calling your attention to what's happening. So, and Jesus comes back and Jairus walks up to him, or that kind of thing, to where it's like we're at the beginning of a new section and we're highlighting what's coming. But here in Mark 14, we're not at the beginning of a section, right? We're kind of at the climax of this pericope, and still we get this, and Jesus, and maybe our English translations could even say, says to him, right? Again, like your English translation probably says said, and that's fine. But the Greek here is a present tense verb, and Jesus says to him. And that calls our attention to what comes next, right? It kind of stops us and makes us think, all right, we're not just kind of flying through the discourse here. We're kind of at a stopping point to where we're interested in what is about to happen.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So we see them a lot in Mark, and I think you said it specifically in this like Gethsemane account. You see a lot of the ones that are adding emphasis. Then there's the
Yeah, which
other,
makes sense. Think about we're in this, we're building momentum, right? It's like we
yeah,
have this kind of press forward toward what's going to happen, and yeah, we have all these present tense verbs that are just kind of highlighting what comes next, what comes next, what comes next until we get to kind of the passion narrative, and then it's kind of slows down, and we get less of that.
yeah, that's really cool to know. And then our next one that we're going to look at are called attention getters. So tell me what an attention getter is.
Yeah, isn't that a great name? This is Steve Runge is kind of the New Testament Greek discourse guy. And this is his kind he's a linguist. This is kind of his official like linguistic term for what this is. So this isn't just me like making up a cutesy name for something. These are attention getters. Think in English like when we say listen or guess what? It's like you could take that out. Like I don't know, if I was telling my son not to go out of the gate in the front yard because it's not safe, I could say like, "Listen, don't go out there unless me or your mom are with you." Like it makes just as much sense for me to just say, "Don't go out unless my me or your mom are with you." Why do I say listen? It's an attention getter. It's something. It's a break in the flow of speech, break in the flow of discourse, an interruption that causes you to kind of refocus on what comes next. And that's exactly what we have here with Amen, truly, Amen. And these are all over your Gospels. You've noticed, right? Jesus says this all the time. Truly, truly, I say to you. Like, what's going on there? It's an interruption. If you take out the truly, if you take out the Amen, it really still makes just as much sense. So why is it there? It's there to stop us and make us focus on what comes next.
Yeah, that's really good. And again, those are the ones that you could definitely just see in your English Bible, like the trulies or the beholds. Like
Yeah,
we don't really say behold very much. We might say like look, but
yeah,
that's doing the same thing as getting your attention in the middle of a story. All right, and then our last
exactly.
one's called meta comments. Meta comments. So what is that?
Yeah,
What is a
meta
meta comment?
comments. What is a meta comment? Meta comment is when you kind of speak abstractly about what you're about to say or what you're saying, right? So when you kind of step out of the story to say, like, hey, I'm talking to you. You see this again all the time in the Gospels. Truly, I say to you, right? He doesn't need to say that. He could just say the thing he's going to say. It's like in English, like imagine if I were to say, like, hey, let me tell you something. That was the best hamburger that I've had in a long time. I didn't need to say, let me tell you something. Like, it's obvious that I'm telling you something. I'm opening my mouth and words are coming out.
Yeah.
Why do I say, let me tell you something? To focus your attention and highlight what comes next, right? I'm stating the obvious, right? When Jesus says, I say to you, obviously he's saying that to you. What's he doing? He's slowing down and stopping the discourse, and and Mark's reporting this, doing the same, to focus on what comes next. This surprising fact that Peter's going to deny him, right?
Yeah, that's just so meta. That's so meta.
It's
I love
so
it.
meta.
Yeah, so those are meta comments. Again, we're kind of stepping out of the story and giving like kind of an unnecessary just comment about what you're about to do. Like again, Jesus could just start talking and we would have the same information. But what we wouldn't have is emphasis to like hang on the next word and see what we really need to pay attention to. Just like you were saying with your son, like when you really want him to pay attention to what you're telling him, you give him several different clues to make sure he's paying attention to you. So Jesus is giving Peter several different clues here to make sure Peter, like, hey, take seriously what I'm about to say to you, Peter, right?
Yeah.
So why is this just important to know as we read?
Well, yeah, I mean, for all the emphasis and energy we put into, like, close, careful Bible study. I mean, whether you're preparing for preaching or just doing your personal Bible study or leading a Bible study, these kind of things are always like, I want to go deep. I want to go, I want to find out the like precise meaning of each word. And I think there can be fruit in those things, but sometimes we also miss like these kind of devices. Like, this is just how language works, not just Greek, but any language. Like, pay attention to these things. Maybe it seems boring or uninteresting to say, like, where are the truly trulies? Where are the I say to yous? If you do know Greek, like, when do we see these historical presents not at the beginning of a new section? Or where do we see them in surprising places? And what is this calling our attention to? Now, again, like the most of these you can see in English just fine. There's a great resource um, through Lexham, the Logos Bible people, called the high definition New Testament. Steve Runge, the guy I mentioned earlier, I think was a big part of putting it together. But it's English. It's an English Bible that has a lot of these discourse features marked in it. But again, even without that, like, and we can put a link to that down in the notes. But even without that, even you're just reading your Bible, when you see a truly, truly, when you see I exhort you, therefore, brothers, like, you don't need the I exhort you. You can just start exhorting, right? So why is this here? It's there to focus our attention. And I think what's so fascinating about right here, if I can pull it up again, now that we know what these things are, is look, we have 3 of these discourse features right in a row. In Mark's reporting and then 2 in Jesus's speech, that are just like, surely what comes next has some weight to it, some surprise, some drama. And boy, does it, right? Peter, the rock, it's going to deny Jesus 3 times before the rooster crows twice.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable, and the way that the discourse flows, the way that the Greek looks, highlights that.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, the thing I really like about at least the attention getters and the meta comments is like we can see these without knowing Greek. And so what's probably the best
Yes.
way if I'm doing my careful Bible study to know, hey, I'm looking at something that's adding emphasis or that's making me slow down.
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing is, think about like necessity. Like, does Jesus need to say truly, or does he need to say I say to you in order to communicate the idea? Does
Mm-hmm.
Mark need to put, I know this is back to the Greek, but does Mark need to put this in the present tense? No, these are all, this is what we might call marked discourse, right? This is not the default. So as you're looking at these things, think about like, what is here that is not necessary to communicate the main idea, and how might that be slowing me down and forcing me to pay attention to what follows. Again, if we were hearing this in English, it'd be really natural. If this was in our own language and our own vernacular. As we're reading an ancient text, that's translated, maybe it's a little bit harder for us to pick up on these kind of natural discourse things that are really, automatic in our own language. So yeah, look for those things. Look for the
Yeah.
look for the amens. Look for the I say to yous. Look for the I exhort you, therefore, brothers. Look for the beholds.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're not necessary there to communicate the point. So it's marked discourse. It's telling you, it's putting more weight or emphasis on something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I had not heard of the high definition New Testament, which I'm really shocked because I'm into the Bible community where we like really check out all the different Bibles and resources that are being
They have an
printed.
Old Testament one too, I think.
That's crazy. I did not know that. So I'm just surprised that my Everything Bibles Facebook group has not mentioned this thing. So
Shout out. Yeah.
Shout out to Everything Bibles. But yeah, I'll have to check that out. So that's really exciting to know. Anything else that you want to leave us with before we go for the day?
No, I think that's it. I hope this has been helpful to get to see some ways that the Greek conversation and thus Greek writing works and highlights certain things.
Awesome. That's really great. Well, I hope everyone out there, you guys enjoyed this conversation today. If you want us to help support the work that we're doing here at Kairos Classroom, feel free to join our Patreon page. We're so thankful for those of you who've already joined to help support us and support those who want to take Greek or Hebrew. And, but aside from that, share, subscribe, all of these different ways that you help to get the word out there helps to support our channel. So we hope that we see you next time here at Kairos Conversations.